Good morning. Welcome to Dublin and our special programme marking the Easter Rising Centenary. Today is very much the centrepiece of the commemoration of the anniversary. In just over half an hour's time, we'll see the full ceremonial formality right here on O'Connell Street outside the General Post Office, the GPO, the scene of some of the heaviest fighting in 1916. A military parade is already underway in the city. It is weaving its way through the streets, passing so many of the locations intimately connected with the events of 100 years ago. It will be a day of very mixed emotions, meaning different things to different people. For many who have a direct link to the Rising, there is a sombre tone today. What happened a century ago had all sorts of implication and impact. And the organisers have stressed they want these anniversary events to be mindful of all those who lost their lives during the course of the Rising. Rebels, soldiers, police officers, civilians, supporters of independence, supporters of the Union, British and Irish. In total, more than 480 people died. We'll hear more about that in a moment. And I'll be joined by some commentators here at this incredible vantage point right opposite the GPO. BBC Newsline's Mark Simpson is with some of the crowd here on O'Connell Street. Mark.
Donna, people have been here since 7 o'clock this morning to try to get the best spot here on O'Connell Street. People of all ages, from all parts of the world. There's a woman there from Germany, a man from Australia, a man even from Argentina. Lots and lots of people from Scotland here as well. There must be nobody left in Glasgow today. Let's take a closer look. As you can see, the crowd stretches right down O'Connell Street. I bumped into people from Belfast, from Armagh, from Newry, from Sligo, from Dundalk, from Drogheda, and of course from Dublin. It's a big day for Dubliners, not just if you're Republican, but if you're curious. This is a big state occasion. As you can probably see, I'm quite close to the GPO, about 500 metres away. The crowd are being kept a little way back, but not the relatives of the 1916 rebels. There's a special place for them, a grandstand outside the GPO, including the relatives of the late James Connolly. I've been speaking to his great-grandson, Che Heron, who's here from San Francisco, and he told me he's really excited to be here in Dublin.
Connolly's always been a part of my life. He's been on my wall since I was a baby. My father was driven by James Connolly. So he was constantly, I was constantly reminded growing up that James Connolly was your great-grandfather, and that you have a personal, I guess what I'm looking for is that, not only a connection, but you have a responsibility to do the right thing, to treat people as equals, to bring people together, and I've tried to do that in my whole life, and even as a police officer, I've tried to do that.
I can tell you he's quite a character. He was telling me he's actually a police officer in San Francisco. He's a rifle instructor. He said with a smile, it seems that guns run in the family. Donna.
And we'll return to Mark through the course of this special programme. It's worth remembering there were incidents in a few other parts of the country in 1916 in counties Wexford, Galway and Meath, and Mark spoke there about people coming from Scotland. I actually spoke to a couple from Glasgow who are here in Dublin because one of their relatives took part in an attack on a police barracks in Ashbourne in County Meath. 8 police officers, 2 Irish volunteers and a civilian were killed during what was a lengthy gun battle in that village, yet another reminder of the loss of life. The Rising, though, was largely confined to Dublin, and it was right across the street here on the steps of the GPO, with just a few bemused passers-by as an audience that one of the rebel leaders, Pádraig Pearse, read the proclamation of the Irish Republic. Our Dublin correspondent Shane Harrison is with me here. And Shane, you've been trying to distill some of the core facts of history that have been somewhat embellished on through the years.
That's right, Donna, and you're right to mention that a lot of the countryside outside of Dublin took no part in the Rising. That's because there was huge confusion about whether the planned rebellion would go ahead after an arms shipment from Germany, overseen by Antrim man Sir Roger Casement, was intercepted off Kerry by the British. There were three groups involved: the Irish Citizens' Army, which was made up of mostly trade union activists. Its best-known leaders were James Connolly and Countess Constance Markievicz. Then there was the biggest single group, the Irish Volunteers, formed in 1913 in response to the formation of the Ulster Volunteers during the Home Rule crisis the previous year. Inside it was a secret radical group, the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood. As Easter 1916 approached, they were pushing for armed insurrection, but were overruled at the last minute by the leadership because of what happened to the German guns. But the IRB and the Citizens' Army proceeded with the rebellion anyway, foreshadowing a long-running debate in Irish nationalism: the gun versus politics. Battered and bruised. 100 years ago, it was from the GPO that Pádraic Pearse proclaimed the Republic. The rising that lasted several days left a city in ruins with nearly 500 dead, predictably mostly civilians. The rebellion took place against a background of delayed home rule and tens of thousands of Irishmen, amongst others, dying on the Western Front in the First World War. While most people see the events of Easter week as a key moment in Irish independence, a former Taoiseach believes the blood sacrifice involved was unnecessary. After all, Scotland had an independence referendum 2 years ago.
I think Ireland would have had a referendum or some other consultation, maybe in the 1920s and the 1930s, looking for much greater level of independence, if not complete independence. And I think, unlike Scotland, it would have passed, because in the Irish case, people wanted independence for its own sake, not because of financial advantages or perceived financial advantages, which seem to weigh a lot in the Scottish mind.
Easter 1916 was part of the insurrectionary tradition in Irish nationalism, but there was also a parliamentary one. Although it's estimated only a third of the people had the vote at the time because of property qualifications and the lack of female suffrage. Unlike John Bruton, the president believes the rising was necessary.
I think that the balance now among historians, not just here but abroad and in Britain as well, is that it did need this event, and it is this event which gave us the space and the capacity for independence and freedom.
In 1918, men and now women voted overwhelmingly in Southern Ireland for Sinn Féin, with its aims similar to those of the rebels. In the north, Unionists got a similar mandate, almost a partition of sorts. According to the estimates, which do vary, more than half of those killed during the rising and in the days afterwards were civilians. That's some 260 people. More than 120 soldiers and 80 rebels were also killed, and 17 policemen lost their lives.
Yes, Shannon, 3 of those policemen were from the Dublin Metropolitan Police. The others were from the Royal Irish Constabulary, which policed the rest of the country. Mark Simpson has been speaking to a relative of one police officer who was killed during the rising.
One of the striking features of today is the fact that the Irish government are going out of their way not just to remember the 1916 rebels, but all of those who died 100 years ago this weekend, including police officers, including 23-year-old Constable Charles McGee, a young Catholic from County Donegal who was killed in County Louth as disturbances spread around the country. His relatives are here today, including his grandniece, Dr. Madge O'Boyle. I spoke to her earlier. Here's what she had to say.
I am proud that the memory of Charles McGee is finally being recognised after 100 years, when there was no mention of victims of the rising. Up until now, in all the commemorations of the 1916 rising, only the leaders and those who proclaimed the Republic were mentioned and were commemorated, whereas now I think this year that victims like Charles McGee are being recognised. Because I set out to ensure that his memory would live down through the generations, and I know now that I have finally achieved that, so I'm going to be very proud.
So many people, so many fascinating stories. I'll be speaking to some of the crowd later. Donna, back to you.
Easter in the calendar is a movable feast. It's particularly early this year. And it's important to note that today's date does not represent the actual anniversary. The rising began on Easter Monday, 1916, and that was the 24th of April. We are expecting the main ceremony to begin here at the GPO shortly. Some events have already taken place this morning, and guiding us through today's formalities from our commentary position is my colleague Seamus McKee. Seamus.
We are watching the arrivals of the dignitaries, Taoiseach and President. Dublin, a city at peace this morning. This time 100 years ago, it was a city unsuspecting. This morning, it is expectant, conscious of a moment in its history being relived. Earlier this morning, there was a military ceremony at a place which, perhaps more than any other, transformed the narrative. Kilmainham Jail, the prison where the leaders and others were executed, turning the rising into what some have described as a triumph of failure. In the weeks after the rising, 14 of the rebels, including all 7 signatories of the proclamation, faced firing squads in the Stonebreakers' yard at Kilmainham. This morning, wreaths were left where they died in that jail. Among those attending were the President, the Taoiseach and government ministers. They observed a minute's silence. The executions took place here between the 3rd and the 12th of May 1916. The first to die was Pádraig Pearse. In a letter to his mother 2 days before his death, he wrote, "People will say hard things of us now, but we shall be remembered by posterity and blessed by unborn generations." His brother Willie was also shot. The executions marked at Kilmainham this morning, as much as the rising itself, helped to change the course of history. The Defence Minister, Simon Coveney, being welcomed to this ceremonial. President Higgins now on his way from Kilmainham to his place here at the GPO. He has referred, prior to this commemoration, to the discrimination against women that persisted into the early years of the Free State and the Republic, and the work that remained to be done, he said, as Simon Coveney moves to his position. If the Republic is to live up to the dreams of revolutionary women of the last 100 years, these are the words of the poet Rita Ann Higgins, as Simon Coveney takes the salute. "I write it out in a verse," she said. Lily O'Brennan, Constance Markovich, Helena Moloney, Ellen Nellie Gifford, May Moore, Rosie Hackett, Dr. Kathleen Lynn, Margaret Skinner, Rose McNamara, Nell Ryan, Lizzie Mulhall, Kathleen Kitty Fleming. The women of 1916, Rita Ann Higgins wrote, did not sit back and wait in the wings of history. As the ceremonial unfolds, Donna, these are some of the reflections prompted by it today.
And we'll return to you shortly, Seamus. As we've been saying, many of the relatives of those who took part in the rising are here today. Earlier this week, we heard from the grandchildren of 3 of the participants.
My grandfather on my mother's side, Harry Williams, was a lieutenant in Jacob's biscuit factory during the rising. He was in various locations around O'Connell Street, Summerhill, and around the Wreath building and Hibernian Bank. He was just got out, he one of the lucky ones, and survived it. And he wasn't jailed after the thing, but that was the end of his participation in it then.
Molly O'Reilly was 15 years of age when she participated in the rising. The year before, she joined the Irish Citizen Army and was based in Liberty Hall full-time. And in witness statements, it has been said that Molly was Connolly's most trusted messenger. A week before the rising, James Connolly sent for her and she thought she was in trouble because she'd broken a window in Liberty Hall the week before. But he sent for her and he asked her to hoist the first flag over Liberty Hall. It was the green flag with the gold harp, and it was to declare that part of Dublin free of British, as she said, imperialism. So she was given that honour.
My grandfather, Frank Henderson, he was a captain in the GPO garrison, as also was his brother Leo Henderson. So they went into the GPO, and they had prisoners with them, and they were being shot at by their own because they saw the prisoners, you know, the British uniform. Connolly had to rush out onto the street and his hands up telling them, stop, stop. So they got into the GPO and Pearse congratulated them because they never thought they were going to make it in. Both Frank and Leo then were continuously in the action, if you can call it that. They were in charge of burrowing through the buildings. When they were arrested, he was marched out, and he was there with all the some of the leaders, and they were marched down to the rotunda. Now there was a green patch, and they were kept there overnight, and in terrible conditions. He was one of the last to leave the GPO, and he was one of the last to leave Fran Goch as well. He got out on Christmas Eve 1916. All the leaders, they weren't men of violence. They weren't military people. They were poets. They were scholars. They were writers, teachers, and they had a vision for Ireland. And they started what had happened under British rule. All the Irishness was taken out of people. You weren't allowed to speak the Irish language. You were put in jail. My own grandfather, he lost his job because when the King of England was coming over on a visit, he refused to go out and wave the Union Jack, so he lost his job because of that.
I think it was a right for self-determination, which is probably a right that has only come into its own in the latter half of the last century. We were a very old nation. We're a very young state. We're only, less than 100 years a state. And I think, these were visionaries, as you said. It wasn't their intent for violence. It was an intent for self-determination, against oppression, and for our right to be independent.
They wanted their own republican recognition, along with the culture and all the good things that go with it. I think that's what they were aiming for at the end of the day. It's the way things turned out.
Among the civilians who died in Easter week was a child of 22 months. The oldest person was 82 years of age. 2,600 people were wounded. The names of just a handful of the dead have a high profile. They were among the rebel leadership. All of the names will be in a memorial wall to be unveiled in Glasnevin Cemetery here in Dublin next month. With me now is Jane Omar, Professor of Modern History. Jane, as we look back to the rebel leaders, and it was referred to by one of the relatives there, an eclectic group of people, veteran Republicans, poets, socialists. How did that leadership gel together?
Well, the first thing is, it is a motley crew. None of them have military experience. So we would have Tom Clark, who's the most senior figure. He would have been a great Fenian leader who had been incarcerated in a British jail for 15 years and was passionate about the Republican movement. Alongside Clark, though, we had people who were very committed, not just to Irish separatism, but also to cultural nationalism. 4 of the 7 signatories of the proclamation were actually playwrights. They were very committed to the Gaelic League, to the Irish language, and to creating a new Ireland.
We can see the Taoiseach Enda Kenny arriving here for the ceremony outside the GPO. The place has an awful lot of military personnel here today, Jane. Something that would not have been uncommon at the time of the Rising in 1916 because of the context of world events. How did that military aspect confuse matters or complicate matters for the rebels and the fighting?
You must remember that Ireland and Britain were in the middle of a war, a great war that had begun in 1914. And so you would have had a lot of military personnel, British military personnel, maybe back on leave. Over 250,000 Irishmen served to fight in the Great War, and of course many of them died in Flanders, at the Somme and Gallipoli. So it was a very, very important aspect of it.
The fate of the civilians during the rising, many wounded, many died, 40 children died in the rising. That seems to have come to prominence more in recent times. How has that changed the story of the rising?
I think it's really helped to humanise the story of the rising, but it shouldn't surprise us that there were many civilian deaths, because here we are in O'Connell Street, and there would have been a lot of tenement buildings around this main city street, and these were some of the worst tenements in Western Europe, and people would have been living cheek by jowl, extremely poor, with high mortality rates, a high unemployment. Of course, many of these men had gone to take the King's Shilling in the Great War, and so there was some income coming back. But the fact that the rebels decided to take the GPO is very significant, because it meant that they were going to have civilian fatalities.
Yes, and we can see pictures. The parade started in St. Stephen's Green. It's making its way through the city, across O'Connell Bridge, and will arrive here outside the GPO on O'Connell Street. Outside the GPO, Pádraig Pearse, the rebel leader, read out the proclamation. If we look in that in the context of 2016, how radical was that proclamation, and what was contained in it, the words that the leaders had written?
Well, at one level, it was a very hasty manifesto that had been drawn up. But of course, it was hugely symbolic, although Pearse would have read it to a rather bewildered group of onlookers. But anyway, it does declare that Ireland is to be a sovereign republic. It invokes the 700 years of British occupation of Ireland. It also recites the 6 other occasions that Irishmen had taken up arms against Britain. There was a real sense of equality in other words, it's Irish men and Irish women. No doubt these were Connolly's words as much as Pearse's. We don't actually know who wrote the proclamation, although it's most likely to have been Pearse. There were 7 signatories, and Tom Clarke is the first, as the most senior signatory. But I think the other thing about the proclamation is that it was very much a blood sacrifice. Pearse knew, the leaders knew, that they couldn't take on the might of the British Army. So it was going to end as a Greek tragedy, some people have said.
You spoke about the small bemused bystanders outside the GPO. Today the streets of Dublin are thronged with people who have come here for the spectacle, who have come here to remember. For the people of 1916, there wasn't a general welcome for the rebellion straight after. How radical or how drastic was the change of opinion once the rebels were executed?
The truth is, there was very little support for the rebellion initially, and it was only as the British authorities began to execute the leaders. But also they rounded up thousands of people who had very little to do with the rising. So what we see is very quickly popular opinion starting to shift here in Ireland, but also in Britain and the United States. However, it shouldn't take away from the significance of what happened here, because what it did lead to, of course, was an unstoppable process that resulted in the separation of Ireland from Great Britain, and of course the partition of North and South.
As we look now, we can see pictures of the cavalcade that's coming up O'Connell Street, up here to the GPO, which was effectively in ruins, Jane. And much of the street was in ruins after the bombardment by the British forces of the rebels. The facade has been kept intact, but this would have been a completely different scene 100 years ago in the Easter week.
There was utter devastation here, Donna. The facade is all that survived in terms of the GPO, but all of the area around Lower O'Connell Street had been blasted by a British gunship, the Helga, which had come up the Liffey, and it really was utter devastation. And here we are in the second city of the British Empire, utter utterly destroyed by the British themselves.
Okay, for now, Jane, thank you. And the President, Michael D. Higgins, has just arrived, being greeted there. His wife Sabina being greeted by the Taoiseach Enda Kenny as we approach the formalities of today and the commemoration of 1916. At the moment, at least, Jane, the rain has stayed off, and it's a nice dry atmosphere and a nice dry weather for all of the crowds that are lining the street. Let's go down onto the street now and join again Mark Simpson.
Thanks, Donna. I'm with some people from Kilkenny, Maria and Bernadette. If you can hear me, it does get quite noisy down here. Maria, explain why you decided to make the journey to the capital today.
My husband is a member of the Defence Forces, so he's obviously working here today. I have two sons, also members of the Defence Forces, and my nephew, Bernadette's son, is marching in as part of the parade today. So I'm very proud to be here and excited about it all.
I told you it would get noisy. Bernadette, what's your feeling about the public mood today in Dublin?
The public mood is really, really good. It's a great day for the Irish people. We're blessed with our weather as well, but a lot of people have been looking forward to this day, and a huge amount of preparation work has been taking place. So it's just wonderful that all of the Irish people can share in all this, and we're in the capital city and right beside the GPO where it all occurred, you know. So.
And what do you say to the critics that say that Irish people just dwell too much on the past and you're dragging it all up again?
Celebrate our country, celebrate what we have in the country, and just go forward.
Well, we wish you well. We hope it stays dry. We'll go back now to Donna.
Thank you very much. As we approach 12 o'clock, the ceremony is about to start. Let me hand you back now again to Seamus McKee. Seamus.
President Higgins moving to his place. Two former presidents are here, Robinson and McAleese. When the Queen visited in 2011, she said, "Madam President, speaking here in Dublin Castle as it was, it is impossible to ignore the weight of history, as it was when you and I laid wreaths at the Garden of Remembrance. They did that in memory of those who died for Irish freedom. The weight of history, so much in evidence here today." The Royal College of Surgeons was one of the garrisons opposite, or occupied rather, by the rebels during Easter week. Earlier there was some ceremonial there. They retreated to the Royal College of Surgeons from Stephen's Green, the rebels did, 100 years ago. And during that ceremony, two flags were handed over, the Irish Republic flag and the Plough and the Stars flag. The Irish Republic flag flown over the GPO in Sackville Street, now O'Connell Street, became the headquarters of the Provisional Government of Ireland. The flag was kept as a war trophy and became the property of the King George V. The Plough and the Stars, the flag of the Irish Citizen Army, created by a Belfast artist, William McGahey, who taught in the School of Art in Dublin. As the President reviews his escort, in 1916 that flag, the Starry Plough, flew from the Metropole Hotel opposite the GPO here. It was thought to have been destroyed, but it had survived the flames. It was taken to England by a British officer as a souvenir. The National Museum of Ireland got the flag from him in 1955. Donna, the weight of history.
Let's speak again to Professor Jane Allmart. Jane, 100 years on, have the events today, do you think, drawn a line onto the past and put the rising 100 years ago?
I think it's very important that we never forget the past because it has shaped us and who we are. But I do feel that this has given us a great opportunity to reimagine a new Ireland, an Ireland for the 21st century, an Ireland that really embraces pluralism and diversity. So I feel that it is a very important moment as we look to the future, as well as remembering the past. Remember, Edmund Burke said, "Those who don't know history risk repeating it."
And And this week and this month has very much been about remembering the past and reigniting that in regard to the minds of the new and present generation.
Yes, and I think that is very, very important. I think it's also very important that we remember that the events that occurred here in 1916 also had global resonances, and we saw actually its impact across especially the British Empire.
Okay, Jane, thank you. Seamus.
Minutes away now from the start of the ceremony, which will be at the heart of today's commemoration. Worth remembering that the defence forces we are seeing on parade today are today serving very much a peaceful purpose, as they have done on so many occasions in so many places around the world. They trace their history back to the Irish Volunteers, Oglig na hÉireann, founded in 1913 in Dublin, among whose founders were Owen MacNeill and Patrick Pearse. The cap badge of the present Defence Forces is derived from the badge of the Irish Volunteers. It was designed by Professor MacNeill himself, born in Glenarm, County Antrim, educated at St Malachy's College in Belfast. Francis Johnson's imposing structure of Wicklow granite and Portland stone, as the President takes the salute in front of it, brings grandeur to O'Connell Street as it has done for 200 years. The GPO, a centre of business and public service, today becomes, as it does on every Easter Sunday, because this is no different from what happens every year. But today, again, it is a place of commemoration, remembrance, but today particularly considerable pageantry. In the centre window, on the ground floor, barely visible from outside, Oliver Shepherd's bronze statue of Cuchulainn, a memorial to the participants in the rising, inscribed with the names of the 7 signatories of the proclamation. A formal assertion of the Irish Republic as a sovereign independent state and a declaration of rights.
Agwini Usla, ladies and gentlemen, the national flag over the General Post Office will now be lowered to half-mast.
Prod, Ara! On Vratak, Shias!
This the protocol, the flag lowered to half-mast for every commemoration. Above the pillared portico, statues of Mercury and Fidelity, Hibernia in the middle with spear and harp.
Agwini Usla, ladies and gentlemen, the head chaplain to the forces, Father Seamus Madigan, will now lead us in prayer.
He has served on overseas peacekeeping missions in Kosovo, Chad, and the Lebanon. A prayer of remembrance.
In Anamanaher, Augustin Vic, Augustin Spirit Nave. Amen. Weimish. God most merciful and kind, on this Easter day of new beginnings, we remember the men, the women and the children of 1916, whose short lives and big dreams extended the horizons of our hopes. In your mercy, the faithful departed find rest. Look kindly, we pray, on all who lost their lives during 1916 and throughout the troubled journey of our island's history. Solus na vlahos dar nanimica ar deshte gorev ananimica. As we reflect on our past, we thank you for all the courageous people of Ireland who dared to hope and dream of a brighter tomorrow for our country and all of its citizens. Blessed are those who sought to build a more inclusive and just society, for they are truly the chosen of God. Look kindly, we pray, on the people of Ireland from all traditions at home and abroad. Help us listen and respond to the voices that challenge in 2016 as we reimagine our future. Conscious of our troubled past, to you, O God, we sing a new song, a song of compassion, inclusion, and engagement, a song of listening, social justice, and respect, a song of unity, diversity, equality, and peace, a song of Céad Míle Fáilte and respect for our environment. With you, O Lord, we long to sing a new song in a spirit of true freedom. Loving God, you know my frail heart and my frayed history. And now another day begins. Give us courage to step onto new ground, eyes young again with energy and dreams. Help us to believe in beginnings, to listen to the voices that challenge, and to sing a new song for Ireland. Together on this island, we have achieved a new peace. We cherish that peace as we cherish all of the children of this island equally. We pray for all those who have suffered in the troubles of the past century, and we hope for peace and reconciliation in the century that stretches before us. The gach duine atá bailithe anseo an lá speisialta seo agus I gceach áit in éireann, go raibh sonas, sláinte agus síocháin linn. Mulla go Joe le dia. Praise God forever. I now invite children from each of the 4 provinces of Ireland to lay flowers on this historic ground as a symbol of our unshakable resolve to live together on this island in peace and harmony.
And now, as a bandsman, Piper Sean Maher plays a lament. The children representing the 4 provinces will lay flowers. From Leinster, Maria Mellon, from Sandiford in Dublin, who's 11. From Connaught, Liam Henry from Claremorris, County Mayo, who's 10. From Munster, Alex Lucas from Kilcohen, Waterford. From Ulster, Tony O'Brien from Portlanone, County Antrim, who is 10. 38 children were killed that Easter week. Among them, Christopher Cathcart, aged 10, shot dead in crossfire at Portobello Bridge. He was one of 9 children who shared a 6-room house with 3 other families. William Mullen from Moore Street was 9. He was shot as rebels retreated. He died at home without medical attention, just a few hundred yards from where this ceremony is taking place. Walter Scott was 8, the last child to die as a result of being shot in the week of the Rising. He was killed at the East Wall by a bullet from the British gunship Helga. And now the combined band featuring members of the Army No. 1 Band and Band of 2 Brigade under the baton of Captain Fergal Carroll will play Danny Boy to the tune of the Londonderry Air. The song was published just a few years before the rebellion. The lyrics chimed with the young men going to war on the Western Front and with those who joined the fight for Irish freedom. James Connolly and Michael Mallon, two of the leaders of the rebellion, had previously served in the British Army. Connolly's brother John was still serving at the time of the rising. 41 Irishmen in the British Army died in action during that Easter week. Lance Corporal Nathaniel Morton of the Royal Irish Fusiliers was 19, from Woodvale Street in Belfast. Private Joseph Cullen from the Shankle in Belfast was with the Fusiliers. Rifleman James McCullough from Donaghadee was killed. Alexander McClelland of the Rifles is buried in Grey Abbey Cemetery. Private John Hanna from Belfast was another among the British dead. The proclamation we're about to hear invokes the dead generations. In this year of centenaries, the different traditions on this island are reflecting on feeling excluded from each other's commemorations, or if there's anything that unites them in honouring their cherished dead. The proclamation will be read by Captain Peter Kelleher from Douglas in Cork. He joined the Defence Forces in May 1999.
Ladies and gentlemen, Zaylun an Gahru law is fihid the Bron, Milan Negade is a Shadeg, Gagurid Inig Van Lay. Honig Podrick Macpirish, Agus Gwyn the Quid Oglig na Heron, Amok as Ord Ifig Anfuisht, Iriarch an Fubble. Fogriag for Ogre na Sersha, Agus fi Tus Curha la Hyri Amok na Cosca. Con an Actra Sho a Camora, Agus the Calura Inu, Ta an Captain Pader O'Callagher, As Kunde Corkig, Ifiguk Arm, Safiha Shaktu Cahalan Cushaha, Con an For Ogra Akur Ivor Loher, As Berla, Fé mar a fógraíocht an ocóid féin I míle négéid is a sédéig.
The continuity announcer is Captain Deirdre Carberry. While the proclamation, or after it's read, the military band will play Misha Era.
Poblacht na Héireann, the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic, to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army. Having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment and, supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished, except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right and again declaring it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally, and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from the majority in the past, until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. The provisional government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean Mock Dermida, Thomas McDonough, P.H. Pearce, Eamon Cant, James Connolly, Joseph Plunkett.
And after the reading of the proclamation,
the Army No. 1 band will now play Misha Era.
I Am Ireland,
Pod,
the
chassis,
title taken from a
Ross.
poem by Patrick Pearse. Sean O'Reilly is haunting music. In February this year, the British ambassador in Dublin, Dominic Chilcott, who's here today, spoke in a debate at UCD. He said, "It seems right that this country is celebrating its independence that was won after a long struggle against a larger and overbearing neighbour. Should remember the key events in the actual path to independence. There is no need," Dominic Chilcott said, "to debate the rights and wrongs of the rising, to conclude that it is worthy of commemoration." And he described the Queen's visit to the Garden of Remembrance in 2011 as the moment history fast-forwarded from weariness to friendship. The transformation, he said, burst into life in that simple, very moving, highly significant commemoration of those who lost their lives in the cause of Irish freedom. And shortly, the Taoiseach Enda Kenny will invite President Higgins to lead into the next part of this ceremony.
Prod, prod, Garden order. Ashamprig, Adam. Garden order. Adam. Ashampaha. Lee.
The parade commander is Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Howard. The parade sergeant major is Major John O'Connor. The wreath bearers are drawn from the 2nd Military Police Company, Corporal Andrew Colohan and Corporal Michael Kelly.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the wreath-laying ceremony and remain standing for the remainder of the ceremony. Agwini Ushla, ladies and gentlemen, I invite An Taoiseach forward.
Mliana, smudge Comora Cave Vlian on Iriamach. Tugamage honor Dorson a Vorsik Emila Nigé this is Sherdiag Leshon Mass agus an Dineth is Dualdoiv. Is more agging Cave Vlian in a year the principal agus na Hidiel a Thassa Varogra a Hridshiad go Fiachfar a son. In this centenary year, we honor the memory of those who died in 1916 with the respect and the dignity that is their due. And we cherish, 100 years later, the principles and the ideals contained in our proclamation for which they fought. Iramanish an Uachtaráin, Flascalagan, Harceann Winche na Héireann, in Omos, the Nadini Fad, a Fuair Boss. I now invite the President to lay a wreath on behalf of the people of Ireland in honour of all those who died.
Speaking ahead of this commemoration, President Higgins said, "There is no single narrative of 1916, no monopoly over the interpretation of our history. Even at the remove of a century," he has said, "the memory of 1916, while of importance and worthy of respect as a foundational event, still carries pain for many."
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now observe 1 minute of silence. The end of the minute will be marked by a muffled drumbeat.
On the Defence Forces website, we read how they hold the 7 people who signed the proclamation in high regard. Barracks and parade grounds named after them. The 7 barracks that make up the Curragh Camp, the Defence Forces Training Centre, are named after each of the signatories of the proclamation. Now the sounding of the last post.
Garnora, Taragig, Arum.
The poignant musical tribute that is sounded from battlefield to battlefield and from one remembrance to another.
Agreeniusla, ladies and gentlemen, the national flag above the General Post Office will now be hoisted to full mast. Reveille will then be sounded, followed by Aron Naveen and a fly past from the Air Corps.
This year, to commemorate the centenary, the Defence Forces have been given the job of delivering a tricolour and a copy of the proclamation to every one of over 3,000 primary schools. Thousands of secondary school pupils were also presented with tricolours at a ceremony in Croke Park here in Dublin earlier this month. The flag, modelled on the red, white and blue of revolutionary France. Thomas Maher, who led the Young Irelanders' rebellion in 1848, said the white in the centre signified a lasting truce between orange and green. "I trust," he said, "that beneath its folds the hands of Irish Protestants and Irish Catholics may be clasped in generous and heroic brotherhood." 6 Pilatus PC-9M aircraft flown by instructors of the Air Corps Flying Training School in wedge formation 700 feet above O'Connell Street. As this ceremony concludes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the annual commemorative ceremony will continue shortly with the march past the General Post Office by the 2016 Easter Parade. This portion of the ceremonies is now concluded and you are all invited to sit.
And now the main parade moves on up O'Connell Street from south of the river at O'Connell Bridge, pausing at the Garden of Remembrance. The garden built on the site where Irish volunteers were founded, the organisation founded in 1913. And it was there that several leaders of the rebellion were held prisoner overnight before being taken to Kilmainham jail and execution. In a speech at the Glen Cree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation last June, President Higgins said, "Engaging with the past is not easy. It involves a complex negotiation of the stories, memories, hurts, legacies and emotions of all who recall 1916 or who are or were affected by the Troubles." And he went on, "Finding a fair and comprehensive way of dealing with the past will be a huge challenge, but a challenge that cannot be shirked." Those words will resonate, Donna, with those who've witnessed this ceremony of celebration and reflection.
Thank you, Seamus McKee. And yes, as the parade prepares to pass along O'Connell Street, we have Martina Devlin and our Dublin correspondent Shane Harrison with me as the people sit down. We're still standing. Thankfully the weather has held for the ceremony. Planned with precision as all of these military events are. Martina, how did you think it went?
The choreography worked. For months we've angsted about whether it should be a commemoration or a celebration. People were conscious of sensitivities and the fact that there was a lot of blood spilled during Easter week. But I think today I feel a sense of celebration. I noticed it this morning when I was travelling in on public transport into the city centre. There was a happy note in the air.
Is that the same with you, Shane? Meeting people and talking about it, there has been a big build-up in the media, of course, and among government officials. But what about the general public? How do you think they're taking this day and this centenary in general?
Well, I think they'll have witnessed a ceremony that was at once stirring, simple, solemn and almost sombre, because the shadow of the Troubles and all the people who died here were commemorated in many ways in what the ceremony saw. And as you join us, we can see an aerial shot of Dublin and you can see how many people are here, and it's quite clear that this has really captured the imagination of the Irish public. I met a few parents and children on the way in, and they were really quite excited about what was going to be happening today. It's all very, very different, of course, from what happened in 1966 when Eamon de Valera was the Taoiseach. He, of course, took part in the 1916 Rising. And who was to know that a few years later that there would be the Troubles erupting in Northern Ireland and the shadow of violence that was to be cast over so many 1916 parades down the years.
How important has it been, this education, I suppose you could call it, Martina, of the Easter 1916 Rising to the new generations? There's been a big programme in schools, a proclamation day. How important has that been?
Well, I suppose a generation has grown up for whom 1916 meant little. In one sense, that's healthy. We can't be prisoners of the past. But in another sense, it's important to remember these people and to learn lessons from their behaviour. And I think, and from their vision especially, and I think that has come through in recent months and weeks. I mean, they were an exceptional generation, the 1916ers, if you like. They understood the importance of collaboration and the common good. They were self-sacrificing in a way which I think we're less so today. And one of the aspects which has been which there has been new attention on is the way that they were they wanted all of the people together to be to accept their Irishness, to celebrate their Irishness, and this wasn't so usual.
Okay, as the parade makes its way along the streets, let's go to Mark Simpson. He has some people there on the ground on O'Connell Street.
Yes, Donna, I heard Shane Harrison talking about the comparisons with the 50th anniversary of the 1960 Easter Rising. Well, how does today compare with what happened back in 1966? Here's someone that was there. Bill, you were there, you were 16 years of age at the time, you're originally from Limerick, you're now living in the United States. How did today compare with then?
Well, back in 1966, the women's part in the Rising was kind of underplayed, and there was very little about their enormous involvement. And the part Connolly played was very underrated too. In fact, you would see pictures of Pearse everywhere, but very little of Connolly. And in fact, people, especially trade unionists, celebrated Connolly by putting pictures of an album that was out of his songs in windows of shops and pubs and things, just to try to make the balance there, you know.
And there wouldn't have been the same crowds by any means.
Well, you know, I was 16, so anything over 10 people seemed a crowd to me, but the street was pretty packed. But, you know, it was quite the event.
And was it all about the rebels and not anyone else that died back in 66?
Yeah, very much so. It was about the men who fought in the GPO. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't even a mention of the Countess Markovitz, let alone Dr. Kathleen Lynn or anyone else like that, you know.
Some Republicans think, well, kind of that's the way it should be in terms of concentrating on the rebels and not everybody else that died. What do you think about the inclusive nature of today?
Well, the Éireann stars Irish men and Irish women, and unless you include the Commemorating man and their incredible struggle in this, the recent troubles were very much a women's war, you know, that it was the women who took the brunt of it.
I think we should give the last word to a woman. Your wife's here, isn't she?
I think so.
Katie.
Yes.
What did you make of today?
I think it's brilliant. It's great to see all these people out in the streets supporting their history, and it's a wonderful thing, yes.
And the sun shone.
Yes, indeed.
It's always like this in Ireland.
Yes.
It's always like this. Thank you both very much indeed. That's the latest from down on O'Connell Street. I have to say, it was quite a moment being with the crowd down here when the proclamation was reread. People reliving history. As you know what things are like normally. People are on their phones, they're tweeting, they're taking selfies. You could have heard a pin drop. It really was quite a moment.
Well, as you come back to me, Mark, you can hear the band behind me quite loud, hopefully not too loudly. Talking about the proclamation and what was written in it, Martina, you were very interested in the proclamation today, grabbing hold of a copy that was given to you. What particularly stands out in the proclamation today, do you think?
This was handed to me as I walked towards O'Connell Street, and I paused to read it because it's a fascinating document. 3 paragraphs from the end, there's a line that talks about cherishing the children of the nation equally, and sometimes that's constructed or interpreted as a class reference. In fact, it's nationalist and unionist background. It's the idea that it doesn't matter where your state was originally, what country you originated in. It's about giving allegiance to the country that you were born in and grew up in now. The idea that it's actually a United Irishman's idea that irrespective of gender, creed, class, that you can work together for the common good. And I think that that was a visionary ideal that the men and women of 1916 absorbed and advanced, and perhaps it was lost subsequently following partition. The 2 states which developed really didn't take this ideal on board. It's a wonderful one. There's something else about this document. It's the first line, Irish men and Irish women. Extraordinary 100 years ago that women were also being invoked. And when you mentioned the school children, what they're learning about 1916, we're being reminded that women went out in 1916. because not just for national identity, but for suffrage, for equality for women. And unfortunately what happened is women were airbrushed out of history and were pushed to the sidelines. And now the current generation is learning about these women. They're also learning about unionists who were part of 1916. People like Roger Casement, a very strong connection with Antrim, from a unionist background, Northern Protestant father, Southern Catholic mother. He connected with his national identity through the cultural movement, the idea that, you know, it was extraordinary, it was revolutionary to think that you could be Irish as opposed to British. And he really got that idea and ran with it. And he's being studied today and given his place in the pantheon, if you like.
Okay, well, as the parade continues, we see both Irish men and Irish women, Shane, making their way on the military parade. Also, many veterans who've been part of the armed forces. When we talk about that proclamation and the young people getting involved, what do you think the definition of Easter Rising is now for young people? Is it just a date in the diary? Or do you think there has been some sort of a rebirth of identity or nationalism because of this big centenary?
Well, I think there probably has been. I was struck about a couple of weeks ago. I met some parents of children outside where I live, and they were all dressed up in their little costumes from the period going in, and parents were saying to me, oh, they're going in to fight the English. I'll have to have a few words with them afterwards to put them right. And as I said before, it's almost as if the shadow of the Troubles still has cast something over the events of 1916. But I do detect that there is a real sense of national pride in what's happened. I do sense also that historians are saying, look, 1916 probably was necessary. If there was to be Irish independence, what was on offer in terms of home rule probably wouldn't have given Irish independence in that particular time frame. Now, there is the alternative view by the former Taoiseach John Bruton, who, for example, says that there probably would have been a referendum in the 1920s or 30s and Ireland would have got its freedom then. But that's a point that nobody will ever know the truth of.
For now, Shane, let's go back to Mark on the street here on O'Connell Street.
Yes, Donna, we're going to get an Englishman's view, a young person's view, but of course you've got to hear from an Irish mammy. You can't have a programme without hearing from an Irish mammy. Helen Healy, an Irish mammy now living in London. Yes. But you brought your family back to see this.
Yes, I thought it was very important, particularly for our son Bruno, to kind of engage a bit with his Irish heritage. This is such a momentous moment in Irish history, and I thought it was important for him to observe it. I'm not sure how much Irish history he's learning in the UK. He's learned about the famine, but I felt he needed to immerse himself a little bit more. So it was very important to come here. And also I think this is a remarkable ceremony. It's much more holistic than the 1966 commemoration. It's remembering members of the British Army who died, the civilians who died, as well as the insurgents.
And what did you make of the ceremony as a whole? Was it inclusive enough?
I think it was very inclusive, yes, and it was very solemn, beautifully. We were very helped, of course, by the weather. The music was wonderful, and I think it's been done in the right spirit.
And what was the moment for you? Was it the reading of the proclamation?
The reading of the proclamation was very moving.
It was. I saw people in tears.
Yeah, I didn't cry, but I thought it was very moving. It was also a very modern proclamation, in that it mentioned women 100 years ago. I mean, in a way, it'd be great if Ireland could move forward with legislation that enabled women to have abortions.
I knew we'd get into politics very quickly. Let's get a quick word with Bruno. Sum it up for us. What do you think? Did you learn anything?
I learned a bit, but most of it was in Irish, and I'm not fluent, so it was difficult. But yeah, I learned a bit about Ireland.
Let's have a quick word with your dad. Give us an Englishman's view of today.
I have no specific point of view that is English. I love a good pageant. I think it's great. I think it's obviously a very important occasion. I think there's an element of it that is positioned as being a sort of healing. Very important. And it's great scene, good weather, and I think it could be a pivotal moment. Who knows? Insofar as the sort of relationship between the UK or England specifically and Ireland is concerned, this might be the moment at which some of the kind of like toxicity comes out of that relationship. Would you agree?
I think it's a very good point. Thank you all for talking to me. I think the main point today coming out of this is whether you agree with the Rising or not, no one can deny it was a landmark moment in Irish history, and just perhaps today will go down as a landmark moment as well. Donna.
Yes, Mark. Well, as the man said, we all love a good pageant. This is the largest parade in the history of the state. Let's return to Seamus McGee. Seamus.
As we look down on Dublin, we've glimpsed those monuments on O'Connell Street. History frozen in stone. It's bookended, that street, by monuments to two giants of constitutional nationalism. If you know the geography, Daniel O'Connell at the southern end, Charles Stewart Parnell at the northern. Engraved on the Parnell monument are his words: "No man has the right to fix the boundary to the march of a nation." And these monuments, I suppose, reminders that the militant was not the only strand, indeed not the majority strand, of nationalism in 1916. Most people, Shane was referring to it, favoured Home Rule, a limited form of self-determination. And then you have the monument to James Larkin, arms outstretched in that dramatic gesture. The man George Bernard Shaw described as the greatest Irishman since Parnell, founder of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, did so much of his trade union work in Belfast before moving to Dublin. He wanted the Irish Citizen Army to form a force along the lines of Carson's UVF, to work for an Irish Republic, but it was James Connolly who formed it into a weapon for his own use and demanded a commitment to revolution and the goal of an independent Irish Socialist Republic. He used Liberty Hall as his base. James Connolly declared, and we can reflect back on today's ceremony as we look down over Dublin and look at these streetscapes. The Republic I would wish, Connolly said, our fellow countrymen to set before them as the ideal should be of such a character that the mere mention of its name would at all times serve as a beacon light to the oppressed of every land. That Republic was declared and suppressed. It was a failed rebellion, but it was a pivotal moment in Irish history, leading ultimately to independence. Donna.
Well, there were many other ceremonies this morning, wreath-laying ceremonies, and one took place at Glasnevin Cemetery here in Dublin. One wreath was laid at the grave of Edward Hollywood, and he was the weaver of the first Irish tricolour in 1848, green, white and orange, based on the French flag. A wreath was also laid at the grave of Peadar Carney, who wrote the lyrics of the national anthem, Aron Navín, the soldier's song. Glasnevin Cemetery, very well known for graves of Irish rebels, and also on a daily occurrence an actor plays the role of Pádraig Pearse and reads out the oration that he made at O'Donovan Ross's funeral, which seemed to ignite the rebels into their fight towards Easter 1916. And on that note of Glasnevin Cemetery, a memorial wall will be unveiled next month, Shane, and it will have the names of all of those who died in the Easter Rising, something that not everyone agrees with.
That's right. Some of those, particularly relatives of the 1916 relatives, think that, for example, the names of British soldiers and policemen shouldn't be on the wall. There are other people who are saying, no, it all has to be very inclusive to reflect the way that Anglo-Irish relations have moved on in the last period or so.
Martina, that note of inclusivity, one thing I did notice today, so many visitors, so many people from around the world. I suppose it's connecting with the diaspora.
Yes, I spoke to a man, an Englishman, whose grandfather was in Boland's Mill with President De Valera, and I said, well, you do know there were no women allowed in De Valera's garrison, and he didn't, so we had a big discussion about that. And I said that contemporary reports at the time then showed that some of the men weren't too pleased about De Valera banning women because they had to do all the cooking. But so you can have a laugh about it as well, and I think it's important too that you don't get too hung up on sacred cows. But I suppose one of the questions is, does it have any contemporary resonance, or is it all just a costume drama or even, triumphalism, God forbid. And I think that, there are lessons that can be learned from it. And for me, I see, ironically, more than ever now, a fortress Ulster mentality and a fortress Ireland mentality. I think that there could be so much more cooperation between the two parts of this island in terms of tourism, trade, culture, healthcare, so many areas of common interest. And I think that it would be wonderful if 2016 and the centenary could be used as a springboard to advance that cooperation. Unfortunately, there are no senior unionists present here, but just behind me, over my shoulder, I see Dominic Chilcott, the British ambassador to Ireland. And when I was on the streets, I heard people referencing over and over again Queen Elizabeth's visit recently and mentioning how she bowed her head before the Republican dead. And that resonated with people. And it's a reminder that it has never been, I believe, an anti-Englishness, but an anti-imperialism. Imperialism is not good for a colonised people. It's only good for the coloniser.
Yes, and Shane, if you think 2016, how those Anglo-Irish relations have changed in the past 100 years.
Well, 1916 has often been described as a rising of poets, and perhaps the most famous poem about 1916 was written by the Nobel laureate W.B. Yeats, in which he said, "A terrible beauty is born." And if you look at Anglo-Irish relations now, you would have to say they're very far from terrible. Beautiful, well, that might be stretching it a bit, because as Martina has just been saying, there is no representative of the unionist community here, even though the Queen 5 years ago went to the Garden of Remembrance and bowed in honour of those Irish men and women who gave their lives for Irish freedom.
Before we're drowned out by the band, Shane, we'll return to Mark Simpson to see who he has been talking to on the streets. Mark.
As the officer in charge of the captain's
This is a real cross-section of people here. This young man's from Armagh, Paula here's from Fermanagh, and Martin, you're from
New York.
And who have you brought with you?
My daughter, Colleen.
Colleen, what have you made of today?
We are just so happy and excited to be here. It's history.
On the 18th of October this year.
Well, she's very happy because I've been in New York 40 years, originally from Dublin. So I brought her over here to see the parade and celebrate the anniversary. Because the last time I was here was in 1966 when at the 50th anniversary. So it's a special day.
What was the one moment today that you'll always remember?
When they raised the flag, they sang the national anthem. That was wonderful. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
We've got to hear from someone north of the border. County Fermanagh is represented. Paula, did you come here for the weekend or did you have an early start this morning?
Just came down this morning. Left the house about 8 o'clock.
Was it worth it?
Oh yeah, brilliant ceremony. Good to be here, be part of it.
And who's this with you?
This is my son's friend, Jean.
Waterford and Templemore.
James, what was the moment of the day for you?
Company commander of the 4th Company.
When the tanks and all went by, definitely. Definitely.
Boys and tanks. We'll give the final word to this young man from Armagh.
Get it. Read this called Get it.
I know Kitty very well. And tell me, sir, why did you come today?
Oh, just for the day.
And how will you remember
the company commander of the 4th Company.
How will you remember today?
Commandant Charlie Reynolds.
What's the moment that you will always remember? Was it the proclamation, the national anthem, the raising of the flag?
National anthem.
And what's the mood been like in the crowd here?
Very good.
You must have been here early if you got a front row seat. Yeah. As you can see, the main parade is passing, but these people aren't moving. Donna, back to you.
Yes, they get up very early in County Armagh to come to Dublin. One thing we all seem to be loving today is the pipes and the drums, so many bands walking along, and as the march parades past the GPO. Seamus, how does it look to you?
There are those who say that by making the Rising the defining moment of statehood, there is a danger, especially if it's commemorated in too militaristic a way, that revolutionary values are somehow elevated. above the democratic virtues that have made Ireland the political entity that it is, as we look at that dramatic monument to James Larkin, arms outstretched, that familiar rhetorical pose of his. But it's always worth remembering that today's Irish Defence Forces are known for their contribution to peacekeeping around the world, and dozens of soldiers have given their lives in missions on several continents, mounted by the UN, the European Union, and the NATO Partnership for Peace. There are so many fascinating dimensions to the memories and the historical recollections stirred by these events. In 1916, Unionists applauded the imposition by the British government of martial law during Easter week, and they urged that what they saw as nationalist sedition should not be rewarded. Lord Carson called it a shame brought upon Ireland. But when the courts-martial of the rebel leaders began, their leader, Edward Carson, urged caution. It will be a matter requiring the greatest wisdom, he said. Whatever is done, let it be done not in a moment of temporary excitement, but with deliberation in regard to the past and the future. Something more to contemplate, Donna.
Well, we've talked an awful lot about the past today. Tomorrow is another day. It is the future. And Shane, lots planned in the city that definitely deals with the present generation, the younger generation looking to the future.
Well, today it's very much about official Ireland remembering 1916. Tomorrow it'll be the people's turn. This area, O'Connell Street, that'll be full of lectures, walking tours. There's going to be a giant ceilidh in Earlsford Terrace. There's going to be a car exhibition, for example, in Merrion Square. There's going to be lots happening, and that's going to bring, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people into the city centre tomorrow.
There seems to have been a cultural revolution as well, Martina, in the last couple of months, especially here in Dublin, but all around the country.
Well, isn't that appropriate? Because a cultural revolution underpinned the military revolution, if you like. But I saw a little boy coming in here, age 7, with his grandfather's medals pinned to his jacket. And I said to him, what are they for? And he didn't know, but he thought they were lovely objects. And his dad said, oh, well, you know, we'll explain it to him when he's older. And I think the idea is to just put it in a much more nuanced context than goodies and baddies and who's on whose side. I think that's important. I think it's important as well, not to, for Irish people, not
Sorry to interrupt you, Martina. We see the helicopters flying up across over O'Connell Street. We had a fly past aerial display earlier, ending the ceremony, and now the helicopters making quite a lot of noise and quite a spectacle as well. Sorry, you were saying.
So there are all sorts of interpretations of Irishness coming from this, and whatever you're having yourself. You know, one of the sort of national casting identity ideas is the plucky underdog taking on.
Okay. I'll leave it there for now, Martina. Back to you, Seamus.
I can't help thinking of the words of Fintan O'Toole, journalist and commentator. The past, he says, is wildly unpredictable. The memory of the Easter Rising has long been haunted by the anxious question, is it over yet? The struggle has always been to decide whether it's history or current affairs, done or dusted or unfinished business. But perhaps today, if I can finish on this is a symbol of an Ireland moving on. As many have said, mature enough to reconfigure its relationships with unionism and with Britain in the last 20 of the 100 years since that pivotal moment in 1916. Donna.
Yes, it really has been a day of great spectacle, pomp and ceremony, everything planned with military precision, really enjoyed by all of the crowds, the throngs of people who have lined the streets, starting over at Stephen's Green, where the parade began, winding its way all the way through the streets of Dublin to the GPO here. And the military parade will continue and will end on a 21-gun salute. We have watched here, though, the main ceremony at the GPO. And as the remainder of that parade continues, we're drawing our special BBC Newsline programme to a close. Our colleagues, though, on BBC Radio Ulster and our news website are continuing live coverage of this commemoration. Have a look at bbc.co.uk/newsni. If you're looking for background and special reports on the Easter Rising, you can find that all in one location on a dedicated website, bbc.co.uk/Easter Rising. Many thousands of people are still on the streets of Dublin at locations which are so very different 100 years ago. Today we've had quiet moments of reflection and music, replacing the sounds of another century in those very same places, sounds of gun and shell fire. It is a changed time now with a changed context.